whole classes of American society who had the benefit of a superior education and, in many cases, a comfortable income, have been AWOL. Lawyers have been AWOL, judges have been AWOL, with very few exceptions in this lockdown. Big medicine, doctors have, with the very few exceptions of the frontline doctors and a few people I can name that have helped us out with this litigation. Almost all of the elite classes of society have supported the lockdown and have not come to the rescue of the beleaguered sort of, ordinary people of America who are suffering. Lawyers they're threatening doctors. I mean, they're threatening doctors who sign exemptions with the loss of their license. Not for any scientific reason, but because this order came on down from high and, in the elite circles that the board certified, the agencies that do board certifications, the agencies that do licensing. There's a lot of people threatened. So far the lawyers haven't been threatened, but there's probably a lot of fear out there. And it's unfortunate. America was founded, whether you like lawyers or not, America was founded by a bunch of lawyers, but boy, the quality of the legal profession and the amount of courage in the legal profession has certainly changed in 1776, when so many of the people who signed that document were attorneys. I'm ashamed that there's been so few lawyers and so few judges who have stood up for the rights of Americans in this increasingly totalitarian lockdown regime. Ralph Larigo was kind of the pioneer in this. About 8 months ago he started doing ivermectin litigation, and basically this is a drug that it can be very helpful to people with COVID at any particular stage, unless it comes, very late, in which case there's nothing we can do. But Ralph is able to convince some judges to order hospitals to prescribe ivermectin, and he had several clients after the drug was administered have a fairly miraculous recovery. So he started doing this litigation around the country. He's been in, I think like 25, 30 states. It's ongoing, and he's got a good team of lawyers, and he's brought in Beth Parlato, who's doing excellent work, and he brought in myself, and I'm trying to help him out as much as I can, and that's what I've been doing for about almost 2 months now. He is working with frontline doctors. I think it's Pierre Corey, who actually testified for us and put in an affidavit the other day. The affidavit was excellent, and we're going to be trying to use that affidavit in future cases. The clients are asked to come up with a certain retainer. Mr. Larigo has greatly discounted his fees, and in many of the cases that, I don't want to give out any trade secrets, but I mean we're discounting it and trying to do the best we can and work with people, but there's filing fees, and sometimes the fees to get admitted in another state are really, I think in one of the, I can't remember the state, I don't want to misstate it, but one of them was like $600. It's very expensive to go to court. The legal system today is not geared to the interests of average people. I don't know if we're even going to have affordable lawyers in the future, unless you're a big company or a big business. This becomes so expensive to litigate. It's so complicated. They bury in paperwork. But I think Ralph Larigo and the other lawyers in the firm have done a really good job to try to provide a really high level of services at a rate that's affordable, because we're always up against the hospital lawyers, who are basically paid by the hour. They're big law firms. They have essentially an unlimited budget, and boy, are they actively litigating against us to deprive people of medical freedom and medical autonomy, even when they're dying and they want to take a shot at a drug that might help them and for which there's evidence. They are fighting like hell, and I don't have the language for your camera to describe what I think about those people. Even in Florida, we've litigated in Florida. I've been involved in some of those cases in my brief time with the firm, and the hospitals down there resist. Now, there's a Right to Try Act in several of the states, but it's tough to meet the qualifications of the Right to Try Act. So we're sort of relying on common law principles of medical autonomy, the patient's right to make choices within reasonable parameters, where you have a doctor who's prescribed that what I like to say is that, you know, it's like a prisoner case, because the person is sort of in a prison of the hospital. They're on a ventilator, they're sedated, and they're restrained. So they don't have the two legs to go out into the marketplace and shop around for different types of treatment. So that's when the judge has to step in and say, this person has the right at this stage of his life, or his representative has the right to try this medication, which could save their life, and we've seen it in our practice, and we've seen it in the studies. It has saved many lives. One of my legal briefs mentioned very early, it was in 2020, the research is already out there, that the ventilators were counterproductive in many cases. They might save your life one day, but the longer you're on it, they're going to really take your life away. And the drug, the other problem we've noticed is there's a drug called remdesivir, which seems to have been used by many of the people who come to us, and it's not working. It has side effects, and so, but they apparently are getting extra money to prescribe remdesivir because it's approved by Big Pharma. It's a patented drug, and they're making apparently a lot of money off of it. So the system's been corrupted. The notion of what's good for the patient, I think, has been increasingly lost during the lockdown. There's more studies in favor of ivermectin than the other drug you mentioned. That's been the primary focus of the firm. Not to disparage, you know, people who support the use of that drug, but we're more focused on ivermectin. A lot of countries use ivermectin to deal with other diseases, such as parasites, and we find the evidence shows that those countries have lower rates of COVID infection, death, and so on. There's also controlled studies on it. Now, the Big Pharma says, well, there isn't a big, huge study, and the problem is that there isn't the funding for it. But the studies that do exist indicate that this can be very helpful. Not in absolutely every case. We're not saying this is some sort of a miracle drug. We're saying that in a large number of cases, this can help people at various stages of the disease. And unfortunately, big medicine, big pharma, big government, big media are suppressing this drug for all sorts of unscientific reasons.
For over 150 years, Pfizer people have been committed to kids. Why? Let's just say we've got lots of little reasons. Pfizer. Life is our life's work.
We watch the news in our house, and we always laugh about the pharmaceutical commercials. Now it's not funny anymore, because you realize that they've essentially bought off the media, and they bought off the politicians. They donate tremendous amounts of money. They visit the doctors, and they give them these little gifts. If you can actually look up your own doctor and see if they've gotten things from Big Pharma, and it may not be a lot of money, but it's this sort of constant salesmanship by young, attractive people, we'll put it that way, going into the offices. I think we've all sort of seen it at the doctors, and over time, there's a sort of a favoritism of what Big Pharma wants to do, and let's face it. I mean, they're totally in control of everything now. I mean, to force kids to to get a vaccine. That's just absurd except for the fact that it's making billions of dollars of profit. So sometimes the simplest explanation is true. That's just money profiteering. I did start to read the report that led to the occupational licensure. Consequences of that was that a lot of African American medical schools were closed down. So we wonder what happened to all the African American doctors. Well, they shut down their medical schools. So I am researching this. I'm not up to date on it as of now, but I am writing a book about the history of American medicine.
The 1910 AMA Carnegie Foundation's Flexner Report resulted in closing 66 medical schools in the U.S., including 5 of the 7 black medical schools, depriving tens of thousands of additional black students who would have become physicians. Journal of American Medical Association study.
I am writing a book about the history of American medicine. I decided to do it because of the atrocious behavior of doctors during the lockdown. We couldn't even get our family doctor to sign an exemption for my son, who's perfectly healthy and doesn't need to be vaccinated, and they wouldn't even return our phone call. So these things that had happened during the lockdown made me angry. I was thinking about writing something about it, but now I'm committed to writing some history of the American medical profession and how it got to be so politicized and corrupt and oblivious to the actual needs of patients. My best-selling book is Progressivism, a Primer, which actually kind of anticipates something like the lockdown happening. I also wrote Government Schools Are Bad for Your Kids, and The Second Amendment Works. And I have 9 books on Amazon and about to have 2 more. One about the crime against humanity known as the lockdown, and another book about the educational crisis in America and sort of a political strategy on how to deal with it. My first book was actually published in 2004. It was called Political Class Dismissed, which is kind of a story about how I went from being a liberal Democrat in the 1970s, the late 70s, to being a pretty hardcore libertarian, and trying to explain why the city of Buffalo declined, but also applying that lesson to politics generally. Buffalo's been in a state of decline for quite some time, and I'm not a particular fan of the present mayor's, sort of corporate welfare, subsidize, businesses. But I think that if the new mayor comes in, we don't know what to expect. There'll be increased taxes. There'll be increased regulations. The remaining rights of landlords will be taken away. She's a big believer in public housing, but when you look at the history of it, it's always been a failure. I mean, people do not want to live in these places, and she's just doubling down on failure. So, yeah, for the least free state, the second biggest city in the least free state, according to the Freedom in the 50 State Project that Jason Sorens does. The last thing we need is less freedom, higher taxes, more regulations, and so I suspect that even though he's a write-in, the incumbent mayor will be reelected. How are we going to strike back against the elites that seemingly control almost every aspect of society? And they get away with whatever they seem to want to do to us. Support local business and small business and family-owned businesses, because that's the America that we grew up in, and this sort of country run by these big businesses that have cooperated in the lockdown, supported the lockdown, suppressed information that would be critical of the lockdown, and they've made billions and billions of dollars. And I'm a free market libertarian. I have no problem with people making money, but not through phony Fed money and phony borrowing, and not by locking down all the small businesses. So this is a way to sort of give back to the small businesses, which were seemingly deliberately hurt. All the small businesses were closed, but Walmart and the big chains were open. Amazon obviously was open. We're striking back at them. We're not just reacting and playing defense. You never win anything playing defense, folks. If it's an ivermectin case, Ralph Larigo Law Office in West Seneca.